In this episode of Sasquatch Theory, Andrea from Ohio steps into the spotlight with a series of encounters that feel less like a single strange night and more like a gradual pull into a hidden world that refuses to stay quiet. What begins as time spent outdoors, ordinary walks, familiar woods, slowly turns into something charged with presence, pattern, and intelligence. Andrea doesn't present herself as someone chasing Bigfoot stories. Instead, she sounds like someone who tried, for a long time, to explain things away before realizing the explanations no longer fit. One of her earliest and most unsettling experiences happened deep in the woods when she became aware that she was no longer alone. As she walked, she began to hear whistling, clear, deliberate, and responsive. One whistle would come from one direction, followed by another from elsewhere, almost as if two beings were communicating with each other while tracking her movements. Andrea describes the overwhelming sense that these weren't random noises or birds, but coordinated signals. What made it even more chilling was her impression that one was larger and more dominant, while the other felt younger, smaller, what she came to believe was a mother and a juvenile. As she made her way out of the woods, the whistling continued, keeping pace with her, staying just out of sight. There was no panic-driven chase, no crashing through brush, just a steady, intentional presence escorting her out. Andrea recalls feeling watched in a way she had never experienced before, not predatory but controlled. It was as if she was being allowed to leave, not pursued. That distinction stayed with her. Later encounters only deepened her certainty that something unusual inhabited these areas. On one occasion, Andrea caught sight of what she first thought was part of a tree, until it moved. A massive black arm emerged near the treeline, thick and powerful, far larger than any human limb. Shortly after, she observed a full figure swaying gently along the edge of the woods. She described the creature as enormous, dark, and surprisingly well-groomed, its movement fluid and almost casual, not frantic or animalistic. The swaying wasn't random, it felt purposeful, as if the being was observing her just as carefully as she was observing it. Andrea also began noticing physical evidence that seemed to confirm these experiences weren't imagined. She found large tracks pressed into the earth, too wide, too deep, and too proportioned to be mistaken for known animals. The stride length didn't match a human gait, and the impression carried weight that suggested something extremely heavy had passed through. These weren't isolated tracks either, they appeared in places that matched where she had heard or seen activity before, reinforcing the idea of a pattern. The sounds were another constant. Andrea speaks about hearing owl-like hoots that didn't behave like owls. They were deeper, more resonant, and seemed to respond to each other across long distances. Sometimes these hoots were accompanied by mechanical-sounding noises, low hums or rhythmic sounds deep in the forest that had no obvious source. She emphasizes how unnatural these noises felt, not because they sounded artificial, but because they didn't belong to anything she could identify. The woods, which she had known her whole life, suddenly felt layered with something hidden beneath the familiar. One of the most haunting moments Andrea recounts happened while driving. On the side of the road, she noticed something large and hairy, partially obscured by darkness and distance. Curious and uneasy, she raised her binoculars to get a better look. The instant she did, the figure vanished, dropping or moving so quickly it was simply gone. There was no place it could have hidden, no delay, just absence. That moment, she says, shattered any lingering belief that what she was encountering was slow, clumsy, or unaware. Beyond the encounters themselves, Andrea speaks candidly about the social fallout. Sharing these experiences hasn't been easy. Friends and acquaintances responded with jokes, disbelief, or polite skepticism. Some dismissed her outright, while others tried to rationalize everything as bears, shadows, or imagination. Yet there were also quiet moments, private conversations where people admitted they had seen things too. Red eyes glowing in the dark. Shapes that didn't move like animals. Sounds that followed them home in their thoughts. Those confessions mattered. They told Andrea she wasn't alone, even if most people weren't ready to speak openly. The stigma surrounding Bigfoot encounters, she explains, often keeps witnesses silent, afraid of ridicule or being labeled unstable. But episodes like this one create space for those stories to exist without mockery. Andrea doesn't claim to have all the answers. She doesn't frame her experiences as definitive proof, nor does she push a single theory. What she offers instead is consistency, repeated encounters across time, environments, and senses. Sight, sound, physical evidence, and emotional response all align in a way that changed how she understands the woods she once took for granted. This episode of Sasquatch Theory isn't just about a creature lurking in Ohio forests. It's about what happens when ordinary people stumble into something extraordinary and are forced to reconcile it with a world that prefers neat explanations. Andrea's story lives in that uncomfortable space between belief and experience, where the unknown isn't roaring or attacking, but watching, communicating, and remaining just out of reach. And once you step into that space, she suggests, it never really lets you go.